HIJK LMNOP WX Y and Z. Do you know your ABC of how to tell a story? Tell me more, tell me now. If you don't know, then let me tell you how. Hi, this is Rituparna Ghosh, and you're watching ABC of Storytelling, where every week I share tips, tricks, techniques, and secrets from my story bag. This week we have the letter R in our story bag, and we have lots of R's popping out of our story bag like every week. So let's get started. The first R that we're going to talk about is repeat. As parents, I'm sure when you're telling stories to children, your child would have perhaps hooked on to one story that he or she loves particularly, and you would have to repeat the story every day or every now and then. I've got stuck with similar stories. I still do get stuck with similar stories, and in fact themes. Now it's more about themes, so therefore repetition is good. You will be stuck with it at some point of time, but perhaps the only way to challenge yourself is to say, how can I tell this story any differently? So every time you tell a story, try to do it a little differently, whether make different voices, bring in new questions, bring in more dramatic moments, or pepper the story with things that you will forget to tell, or say things which are not there in the story. So you reinvent the story in a way, repeat it in such a way that it's more interesting for your little listener, and he or she is intrigued enough to question you, to ask you, or to correct you if you're going wrong or if you are digressing too much from the story. So make repetition fun, make it into a game, see how well, and also use it as a way to just, if not anything else, just to polish your storytelling skills. So that's the trick. The second R that we have for you is recall. As a storyteller, I've been blessed with having so many instances where I've met children who watched me perform in their school or in a festival or somewhere else, where they have seen me at least 2 or 3 years before, and they've come back to me remembering me for the story that I told them. So when I meet them, the first thing I do is, of course, I give them a big tight hug and I say, oh, thank you for coming back, or thank you for remembering the story that I've told you before. So I use that little opportunity to recall that story. So do you remember what story did I tell you? What was it all about? What did you think about it? And all such little, perhaps sometimes intricate questions about what activity did we do, or did I make you sing a song, did I get you to do a jig in the middle of a story? So sometimes children remember that, and the recalling that story, that moment, is a moment of pure joy. It's a great rewarding experience for me, as well as it's a great way to understand how do children process memory, how do children process the experience of a story over a period of time. So if I were to tell the same story to them again, that also has happened, that a child has come back to me saying that, please read me that book that you read to me last summer, and I've had to do that. So when I do that again, when I recall that story, whether by reading it or by telling it or enacting it or using some other techniques where I get children to tell the story back to me, I always ask them, is this recall any different? Has this changed the way you look at the story? It's a great experience, so you must try it. Go ahead and recall stories which you have told before. If children recall stories, then there's nothing like it. That means your story has reached home, and they have kept the story like a precious memory in their heart and in their minds. So, but even if not that, even if you were to recall a story that you've told in the past, ask children what do they remember about it, how well do they remember the sequence or the characters, or how they felt for that matter, or their response to the story. So that's another R that we have for you. The third R that I have for you is reconstruct and reframe. Sometimes stories come to you in a form where some of the elements in the story are tellable, whereas some of the other elements may not be as tellable. So sometimes I don't use extreme violence in my stories when telling stories to children. I tend to move them, or I try to reconstruct or reframe the act by saying where the stronger animals is really fooled, or rather tricked, without any bodily harm coming to that animal. So that's one of the ways that I reconstruct and reframe stories. Sometimes I also adapt longish stories. I reconstruct them, remove elements, remove plot points, remove certain actions, certain characters, and I retell the story in my own words or in my own way, so that I adapt a story for a certain audience. For example, the same story, when I'm telling it to let's say a fifth grader, or when a second grader, has to be told a little differently, because their language understanding or their comprehension skills are different, their ability to sit through a story is different. So therefore, I sometimes reframe or reconstruct stories to suit the audience that I'm telling to. Remember, a storyteller is defined by the stories he or she tells. So therefore, it is a complete indication of the kind of stories that you eventually pick up. Whether you're going to tell the story in its entirety, the way it is, or you're going to add a little spin of your own, add a little twist of your own to that tale, and where you reconstruct and reframe a familiar tale in such a way that it is completely new for you, new for the audience, as well as a signature of the storyteller, which is you in this case. The other R that I'm going to share with you is rest. Yes, rest, which is very important. Remember, last week we talked about questions and how questions can lead to a lot of conversation and dialogue with the audience. At the same time, it's important to give your audience a bit of rest. If you're going to bombard them with new thoughts and new feelings and new emotions and lots of, let's say, new experiences through the stories that you tell, sometimes it may get overwhelming. So let your child slow down, rest for a bit, let the story work its magic, let the thoughts come and go, let them come back to you with their expressions, and let them come back to you with questions or feelings that you will perhaps poke and provoke them, or let's say prod them a little further to dwell on them. So don't be in a rush to tell many stories one after the other. Let go slow, give the listener some rest, let the listener think about stories, let the listener ponder and chew the story so that they derive complete nourishment from it. Write to us and tell us whether these tips are useful for you or not. We've been getting lots of messages from you, and so thank you. There are a lot of people who are writing to us asking us about ABC of storytelling and how we can help them further. So please keep those mails coming to us. Subscribe to the YouTube channel if you haven't already, and keep following us, writing to us, and happy storytelling. Ta-ra-ra-ta-ta-ra-ra. Ba-di-da-ra, ta-ra-ra-ra. Ciao.